Why is my maid sleeping on a bench in this freezing cold? Oh no, she's freezing! I have to help her right now!
I'm sorry, sir. I was just so tired.
My name is Leanne Monroe, and for 2 years, I scrubbed, swept, folded, and polished my soul out for a man who couldn't even remember my last name. Mr. Darnell Brooks was a household name in Lincoln Hills, Illinois, a luxury neighborhood tucked between Lake Glendale and people with too much money and not enough heart. He owned properties up and down the East Coast, made millions through real estate flipping and private equity, and wore his suits like armor. I, on the other hand, wore second-hand uniforms with fading name tags and holes near the seams. For him, I was just the help. And I kept it that way. Quiet, quick, invisible. Until one bitter December night when everything changed. It was snowing hard the day he fired me. The sky was a cruel pale gray, and the wind moved like it had something against the living. I'd been late that morning, only 6 minutes, and that was all it took. Darnell was pacing in the grand hallway of his Tudor-style estate when I walked in, soaked from slush and windburned, clutching a threadbare scarf around my neck. His eyes didn't even lift when he said, "You're dismissed." "Sir?" I asked, my voice low, hoping maybe he was talking about something else. "A vendor. A guest." He looked up, impatient. "We're done here. You're not reliable. No questions. No chance to explain. No notice. No kindness." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, I just nodded and left. I didn't want to beg. He didn't know, of course. He didn't know that I'd been sleeping in the storage area behind the wine cellar for months. That I had nowhere else to go after my mama's stroke back in Baton Rouge. I was sending nearly every dime I made to help with hospital bills and food for my little brother. He didn't know my apartment was gone, that my phone had been cut off, that my boots had holes in them covered with duct tape inside. That day, I didn't go to a shelter. They were all full or too dangerous. I didn't go to a friend's place. I had none left nearby. I didn't even have a bus token. I just walked. I walked for blocks until my legs gave out, then sat down on a park bench near the intersection of 14th and Madison, a few blocks from the financial district where folks rushed past like time owed them something. I told myself I'd just rest for a moment, just a moment. Close my eyes, let the wind stop stinging for a second. That's the last thing I remembered. Across town, Darnell's morning was falling apart too, but in an entirely different way. His driver had canceled last minute because of icy roads, and for once he had to walk to his meeting. Just a few blocks. Just a brisk 10-minute trek past Union Park. Darnell hated walking. He said sidewalks were for people who haven't figured life out yet. But there he was, leather gloves pulled tight, chin tucked into his collar, moving fast through the freezing air, steam rising from manholes like ghosts from below. That's when he saw me. I can only imagine how I must have looked, slumped on that bench like discarded laundry, my blue maid uniform crusted with snow. My fingers curled inwards, my lips pale, body barely moving. At first he walked right past. Of course he did. Then something stopped him. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe just the twitch of memory. He turned back, took a step closer, then 2 more. He saw my face. I wasn't just a frozen stranger anymore. I was Leanne. The woman who used to bring him hot towels after workouts. The woman who made sure his fireplace was always burning before he came downstairs. The woman he fired. "Leanne," he said out loud, blinking in disbelief. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He reached out, his gloved hand brushing my arm. I was stone cold. My skin, he later told me, felt like touching metal left out in the snow. That's when panic hit him. Not the kind born from missed deals or crashing stocks. This was deeper, human, instinctual. He called 911, his voice shaking. "I need an ambulance. There's a woman, unconscious. She's freezing. Please hurry." He didn't hang up. He sat there with me, brushing snow off my shoulders, ignoring the people staring, ignoring the fact that his $5,000 wool coat was now soaked. For the first time in probably years, his schedule didn't matter. Only I did. The EMTs arrived within 10 minutes. 10 long minutes where he sat whispering things I couldn't hear, apologizing for things he didn't fully understand yet. I was carried away on a stretcher, bundled like a child in emergency blankets. He followed. Not because he had to, but because something in him cracked open that day. At Lincoln Regional Hospital, I was diagnosed with severe hypothermia and borderline pneumonia. They said another 40 minutes outside and I'd have died. When I finally opened my eyes 2 days later, everything felt like a dream. My body ached, my mouth was dry, my chest rattled when I breathed. And there, sitting beside my bed like a statue carved in gilt, was Darnell Brooks. His tailored suit looked slept in, his face was pale, his eyes red. "Am I dead?" I whispered. He blinked. "No, you're alive, you're safe now." I stared at him, then looked away. "Why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment, then said the words I never expected to hear from a man like him. "Because I should have seen you, I should have known. And I didn't, and I'm sorry." Something in me shattered. Not because he said sorry, but because I knew he meant it. I turned toward the wall, eyes full of tears. "I wasn't late on purpose," I whispered. I didn't sleep the night before. I had to pick up meds for my mama. I walked all night to make it here." He nodded slowly. "And I never asked. I just assumed. That's my shame, not yours." He didn't leave that night. Not once. Not even when the nurses asked if he wanted to rest. And that was just the beginning. By the time the snow melted outside Lincoln Regional Hospital, something else had started thawing too, inside Darnell. He returned to his mansion the next morning, not as the stone-faced mobile his staff feared, but as a man visibly shaken. The house, once sterile and pristine like a showroom, now felt too big, too cold, too quiet. He gathered everyone. His housekeeper, his driver, 2 groundskeepers, the chef, and his assistant, who had already emailed him 6 times about missing his conference call with the Singapore investors. They stood in the foyer beneath the crystal chandelier, not knowing what to expect. Darnell was never one for meetings outside of the boardroom, let alone ones involving people who changed sheets or trimmed hedges. But he stood there, hands behind his back, eyes locked on the tiled floor as if looking through it. "I want to tell you all something," he began. "Something I should have said a long time ago." They exchanged nervous glances. He never said anything he didn't have to. "I fired Leanne last week without asking a single question. She had worked in this home for over 2 years. Quietly. Efficiently. Never once complained. Never once asked for more. And I threw her out in the cold for being 6 minutes late." A pause. "Then, she almost died on a bench downtown, from the cold, alone, because of me." Silence gripped the room. His assistant fumbled with his tablet. His gardener swallowed visibly. And the cook, Miss Rowena, who had worked in that home longer than all of them, covered her mouth and started crying softly. "I can't take back what I did, but I won't pretend it didn't happen either," Darnell said, voice low. "I've built towers across this country, and yet I couldn't see a woman collapsing under the weight of a life I never bothered to ask about. That's not success. That's blindness." He lifted his head and said the 2 hardest words of his life. "I'm sorry." That was the first time in 20 years that Darnell Brooks had apologized to anyone not wearing a suit. The story traveled faster than he expected. A jogger who'd taken a photo of me sleeping on that snow-covered bench had posted it on social media with the caption, "How do we let this happen?" It went viral. Thousands of comments. News anchors calling it shocking negligence. Radio stations debating if employers owed their domestic staff more than just paychecks. Think pieces. TikToks. Reposts. Hashtags. Everyone wanted to know who the woman in the blue uniform was. But no one expected the CEO of Brooks Holdings to say nothing to the press. Instead, he visited the hospital every day. Quietly. No cameras. No PR team. Just Darnell in a navy pea coat, holding a bag of clementines because he remembered me once saying they reminded me of home. When I was well enough to walk again, 3 weeks later, I was discharged. I stood in the lobby of the hospital, unsure where to go. I had no place waiting. The shelter was full again. My brother had barely scraped together enough to keep our mom's medications going. Then I saw it. A sleek black town car parked right out front, and Darnell was standing beside it. He wasn't in his usual 3-piece business suit. No flashy cufflinks, just slacks, gloves, and a wool coat zipped halfway. In his hands were a soft gray coat, a thick scarf, and a new pair of boots, sturdy, warm, and just my size. "This isn't charity," he said before I could speak. "It's a correction." I stood frozen, unsure of what to say. He added, "I'm not offering you your old job. I'm asking you to come stay, in the guest wing, to heal, to rest, to have a warm bed while you figure out your next chapter." I wanted to say no. Every part of me wanted to protect what little pride I had left. But the truth was, those hospital bills alone would have buried me for years, and I had no home to return to. I nodded, slowly. Okay, but only for a little while. He smiled, and for the first time ever, it didn't look forced. The guest wing was unlike any space I'd ever been allowed into. High ceilings, soft gold light fixtures, a reading nook with thick woolen throws, a heated bathroom floor, candles that smelled like vanilla and cedar. He'd even stocked the fridge with my favorite almond milk and those Louisiana red beans I once mentioned during meal prep. There was no schedule, no tasks, just rest. A private doctor came twice a week, a therapist once. And 3 days after I arrived, my brother Emmanuel and Mama showed up too, safely flown in, now living in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment just 6 blocks away. Darnell had leased it in their names. No publicity, no fanfare, just dignity. Each night Darnell would check in, not like a boss. More like, I don't know, a friend trying to learn how to become a better human. We'd sit by the fireplace in the west parlor, sipping herbal tea. He asked about my hometown, about the creek I used to swim in, about my first job cleaning houses at age 12, about my dream of becoming a social worker before Mama's stroke changed everything. He listened, really listened, like no one ever had before. I used to think people like you had easy lives, he admitted one evening. I raised an eyebrow. People like me? You know, quiet, polite, invisible. I thought if you weren't complaining, you weren't struggling. I smiled bitterly. Sometimes silence is the last form of dignity people have. He didn't argue. He just nodded. 3 weeks into my stay, I began helping his staff in little ways. Not working, just observing, asking questions, noting the cracks no one else saw. It became obvious that I wasn't the only one whose story had been ignored. Housekeepers working 16-hour shifts with no insurance, gardeners whose overtime hours mysteriously vanished from payroll, nannies expected to travel without additional pay. Darnell was horrified when I showed him my notes. How did I miss all this? He asked, reading through the pages. I didn't sugarcoat it, because you never looked. A few days later, he asked to meet with me formally. We sat in his office, but it didn't feel intimidating anymore. He slid a folder across the table. I want you to consider taking on a new role, Director of Employee Care and Ethics, across all my properties. Not just this house. I blinked. What? You'd be salaried. Full benefits. Office space. You'd report directly to me. You'd be responsible for making sure no one ever slips through the cracks again. My hands trembled. You trust me with this? He looked me dead in the eye. I've never trusted anyone more. I didn't say yes right away. That night, after Darnell offered me the position of Director of Employee Care and Ethics, I walked back to the guest room and closed the door behind me. I sat on the bed and stared at the folder he gave me. Salary breakdown, job description, company structure. Everything was outlined in detail. It wasn't a symbolic role. It was real. It was powerful. But something in me hesitated. Was I ready to step into a room where people once looked straight through me, where they whispered when I entered, or worse, didn't acknowledge me at all? Could I move from being the maid to becoming a woman with authority, decisions, and influence? I opened the folder again and reread the final line on the offer letter. You are not a second thought. You are the future we should have seen sooner. I let the tears come this time, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen. The next morning, I met Darnell in his study. He stood when I entered, something he'd never done before. I accept, I said. He didn't smile wide or make a big scene, just nodded once, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And from that day on, everything began to shift. I started by visiting each of his properties, from the lakefront condo in Milwaukee to the 3-story brownstone in D.C. I met the teams, sat with the staff, ate in the employee break rooms, asked questions no one had ever asked before. Do you feel safe working here? Do you have someone you can talk to when there's a problem? What does fairness look like to you? They looked confused at first, hesitant, but over time, walls came down. Truth came out. At one estate, a live-in cook revealed he hadn't had a single day off in 5 months. At another, a housekeeper admitted she was paying for a shoulder injury out of pocket because she didn't understand the health coverage. In Miami, a gardener broke down crying because no one had ever said thank you for his 20 years of service. I wrote everything down, created new policies, hired a small team to help me audit and rebuild every HR process. And Darnell? He backed every decision. He started attending monthly check-ins with staff himself, sitting beside them instead of at the head of the table. He introduced bonuses, mental health resources, and scholarships for employees' children. He wasn't just fixing a broken system. He was changing his soul. One evening, as we were reviewing a quarterly ethics report in his office, Darnell paused and said, "You know what I regret the most?" I looked up from my notes. "What's that?" "That I needed the whole world to see you frozen on a bench before I saw you as human." I didn't say anything. What could I say? But then he added, "That won't happen again. Not under my watch. Not on my name." About 3 months after I took the position, Darnell hosted a charity gala in the mansion's ballroom. It was for a literacy nonprofit that helped underserved youth in the Midwest. Every inch of the room was transformed. Gold chandeliers, glass centerpieces, string quartets, the smell of roasted garlic and fresh roses in the air. Guests wore designer gowns, silk suits, diamonds that glinted with every movement. I stood near the side, wearing a navy blue dress Darnell had insisted on buying for me. My hair was braided neatly down my back, and for once, I didn't feel like I was out of place. I felt like I belonged. Then, something unexpected happened. Darnell tapped the mic. The ballroom quieted. He cleared his throat, glanced at the crowd, and began. "I've spent the better part of my life building skyscrapers, chasing contracts, and expanding my name across portfolios. And I thought that made me powerful." He paused. The room was silent, but a woman I barely saw, who served in my home with quiet dignity, showed me what real strength looks like. She showed up when the world forgot her. She endured when no one noticed. She suffered in silence because men like me didn't ask. He turned toward me. "And tonight, I want you to meet the woman who changed everything." My heart stopped. I froze. Everyone turned. People who had never looked twice at me, guests in jewels and heels, developers, lawyers, journalists, now stood and clapped. For me. I walked to the stage slowly, hands shaking, heart thudding so loud I was sure it echoed off the marble walls. When I reached the microphone, I didn't read a speech. I didn't have one. I looked at the faces in the room, then said, "I used to think power meant owning something, controlling something. But now I know, it's about lifting someone. It's about seeing someone. It's about doing the right thing even when nobody's watching." I paused. I was invisible, but I'm not anymore. The applause was thunderous, not out of pity, out of awe. Backstage, after the gala ended, a young woman approached me. She was one of the catering staff, maybe 20 or 21. Her name tag said Jasmine. She whispered, "Miss Monroe, your story? That was me last year. I was homeless, working nights, trying to keep my little sister fed." My eyes welled. "You're not invisible either," I said, placing a hand over hers. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the music had faded, Darnell found me on the back patio, overlooking the lake. "You were remarkable," he said. I looked up at the stars. "No, I was just honest." He exhaled. "Same thing sometimes." 2 days after the gala, I stood in front of the mirror in my new office. Yes, my office, inside the main administrative building of Brooks Holdings. Frosted glass doors, a framed photo of my family on the desk, sunlight spilling across the cream rug. I looked at myself. Same face, same eyes, same scar under my chin from when I fell off Mama's porch at 11. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I saw a woman I respected staring back at me. Not the maid who scrubbed toilets behind closed doors. Not the girl who hid behind "yes sir" smiles. But the director. The leader. The survivor. I threw myself into my work even harder after that. We launched the Invisible No More initiative, a company-wide program that focused on 3 key things: proper pay and benefits for domestic staff, training managers to recognize and respond to distress, creating emergency support funds for workers facing family or housing crises. We rolled it out across 6 properties in the first month. The feedback poured in like water bursting through a dam. Janitors who had worked 30 years were finally recognized. A cook at the Seattle estate told us she finally got her first dental checkup in a decade, paid for by the company's new benefits. A chauffeur in Atlanta shared how he used the emergency fund to pay for his daughter's textbooks. The stories kept coming. And with every story, I felt a little more of the past wash off my shoulders. But not everything was smooth. One afternoon, a senior executive, let's call him Mr. Wallace, stormed into my office, face red, voice sharp. "Leanne," he barked, "what's the meaning of these revised employment contracts? You're inflating cost projections by 30%. I didn't flinch. I stood up slowly and met him eye to eye. "I'm adjusting them to match the actual cost of treating your employees like humans." He blinked. "I'm not here to make the rich richer," I added. "I'm here to make sure no one ends up sleeping on a park bench because someone up the chain didn't care enough to ask," he scoffed. "You think you're some kind of savior?" I smiled, calm. "No, I think I'm someone who survived, and I won't let others drown quietly." Darnell backed me up later in the board meeting. Publicly. Without hesitation. "You don't like our new structure," he told Wallace. "You're welcome to find another company that values profits more than people. That's not who we are anymore." Wallace resigned a week later. No one missed him. Outside of work, something else began to shift. Darnell and we got closer. Not romantically. Not yet. But something deepened. He wasn't the same man who barked orders and never looked up from his phone. He was softer now, more thoughtful. He started checking in on Emmanuel, my brother, bringing him basketball shoes and asking about his classes. He even began visiting my mama, who still couldn't walk on her own, bringing her stories and listening to hers. One night, she laughed so hard at one of his jokes that she spilled soup down her dress and didn't even care. "I don't know what happened to that man," she said later, "but it's like God cracked his heart open." I nodded. Maybe he did. One Saturday morning, Darnell and I visited the old park where he found me that night. The bench was still there. He had a small plaque added to it. It read, "May we never overlook those right in front of us." I stared at it for a long time, silent. Then Darnell said, "I come here sometimes now, to remind myself." "Remind yourself of what?" "That I used to be blind." I turned to face him. "You weren't blind, you just never had to look." That night, I had a dream. I was back on that bench, snow falling, breath fading. But this time I wasn't alone. 100 women stood behind me, all dressed in uniforms, all with quiet strength in their eyes. And behind them, Darnell, watching. Not with pity, with respect. The next morning I woke up early and wrote a speech. I had been invited to speak at a national summit on labor ethics in Chicago. CEOs, policymakers, journalists, people who, like Darnell once was, had no idea what it meant to be poor, tired, invisible. I stood on that stage 3 weeks later, the lights bright, the crowd buzzing, and I told my story, all of it. How I lost my apartment, how I slept in a closet, how I was fired for being late by 6 minutes, how I almost froze to death, how someone saw me just in time, and how that changed everything. And I ended with this: we don't just need more policies, we need more people willing to see each other, to listen, to ask, "Are you okay?" before it's too late. Because no one should disappear in silence. The applause was thunderous. Some people cried, some stood. Afterwards, 2 CEOs came up to me and asked how to start their own employee care programs. The ripple had begun. That night, back in my apartment, yes, my own, I stood in the bathroom, brushing my hair. I paused, looked in the mirror again. Same woman, same eyes, but no longer surviving. Leading. The following spring, Darnell received the Human Dignity Award at a private ceremony hosted by a national nonprofit that recognized corporations for changing labor practices. He hadn't even known he was nominated. He stood on stage, trophy in hand, looking like he was still trying to figure out how he got there. "I don't deserve this alone," he began. Because the real shift didn't start with a policy or a headline. It started with one woman. One moment of truth. And a very cold bench. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. That weekend, he invited me and my family over for dinner. Not as staff, not as guests, as equals. Mama wore her Sunday best, her new walker gliding easily on the polished floors. Emmanuel talked non-stop about his college plans. Darnell sat with us in the kitchen, laughing and passing cornbread like we'd known each other forever. "I gotta say," Mama grinned, looking at Darnell, "you clean up nice, but your greens still need seasoning." He laughed so hard he almost dropped his fork. For the first time in my life, I saw what healing looked like across a table. Messy, warm, alive. Weeks turned into months. The Invisible No More initiative expanded to over 30 corporations after the summit. I started doing workshops for employers across the country. We launched an online portal for domestic workers to report unsafe or unfair treatment. The stories poured in. We built systems. We built safety nets. We built dignity. 1 year after the night on the bench, I returned there alone. The snow had returned, soft and clean. The plaque on the bench had begun to gather a little rust. I wiped it gently with my glove and sat down. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, to breathe, to remember. I thought about that girl who had nothing but 6 layers of worn clothes and a heart full of quiet fight. I thought about how close I came to becoming just a headline. And I thought about how one man who never saw me finally did, and didn't just feel bad, but changed. That night, I wrote something. Not for a press release, not for a blog, for me, a letter. Dear Leanne, you were never invisible. The world just needed new eyes to see you. You were never small, they just never looked deep enough. You were never weak. Not when you walked to work without food, not when you slept on the floor to send money home, not when you endured it all with grace. You changed everything. Don't forget that. I framed the letter and hung it in my office, right beside a photo of Mama smiling in her church hat and a photo of Darnell and Emmanuel high-fiving at his college orientation. One day, I received a letter. A handwritten one, delivered to my desk. It was from Jasmine, the young catering staff member I met after the gala. She was now working at a nonprofit that helped women transition out of homelessness. She wrote, Miss Monroe, I saw you when I didn't see myself. Now I help others see themselves too. I sat quietly after reading it, and I cried, because that's when I knew. This wasn't just my redemption. It was a chain reaction. Months later, Darnell stopped by my office unannounced, carrying a wrapped package. He handed it to me, eyes twinkling. What is this? I asked, peeling away the navy blue paper. Inside was a framed photo. It was a shot of me walking onto the gala stage, back straight, dress flowing. Below it, in bold letters it read, The Woman Who Changed the Mirror. I laughed, tears stinging my eyes. You're getting sentimental in your old age. He smirked. Call it perspective. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Maybe I'll write a book. Maybe I'll start my own foundation. Maybe I'll just keep helping one company, one family, one person at a time. But I do know this. I was once a woman the world passed by. Now, I'm a voice that helps the world stop and listen. Not because I demanded it, but because I endured long enough to deserve it. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Sometimes the greatest act of kindness isn't changing someone's life. It's simply seeing them before it's too late. What part of Leanne's journey moved you the most? Was it Darnell's transformation, Leanne's incredible resilience, or the powerful reminder that every person deserves dignity and compassion? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you believe stories like this can inspire more kindness in the world, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another life-changing story. Thank you for watching, and until our next story, remember, one moment of compassion can change a life forever. Maybe even your own.